everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm going to be talking about pet portraits and also mixed media watercolor techniques. So before I get ahead of myself, which I already have, my name is Vic Hollins. I'm an artist here in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm an art ambassador for Royal Talens. And today I'm going to be telling you guys about my favorite Royal Talens products, and I'm going to be showing you some different tips and techniques on how to use them and incorporate them into your own pet portraits. So Blick Art Materials is doing a really cool pet portrait contest where they're randomly selecting a winner to win over $400 worth of art supplies, which is really awesome. So if you have not done a pet portrait yet, now is the time. And I'm going to be going over how I'm going to paint it with a photo reference and also all the materials that I use with it. So before I talk to you guys about the supplies, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Blick Art Materials for having me, and of course to Royal Talens for the products. Okay, so we're just going to situate the camera really quick, and then I'm going to jump right into talking about my favorite products with you guys. And also one more thing, this is a live stream. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them, and I'm going to do my best to answer as many as I can. So let's switch over the camera really quick. All right, get that all situated. All right, so today we will be painting this adorable cat that I know. Her name is Totoro. I printed out a photo reference so I can kind of show you guys how I'm painting it. Let me go over the materials first. So this is a heavily used and very well loved Van Gogh Pocketbox palette. So it comes with 12 different colors. And when you get yours, it's going to be a lot more clean looking than this. But the colors inside are really great for mixing. You have 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 greens, as well as a sienna and an ochre. So the Pocketbox set comes with a travel brush. So what it actually does is it flips out just like that, and you have a number 6 round. So this brush actually acts as a key. As you can see on the back end right there, has a little notch in it. So you can actually use this notch to pop up this back area, and you have all this different room to mix. So if you really like to mix and you're kind of a sloppy artist like I am, then you will have all that extra room. So this is a really great set if you're on the go. It's an artist quality paint, which means it's great for beginners and also professionals. So I'll be using this today for my first layer. The next supply that I wanted to go over was the Amsterdam Acrylic Ink. So this is really amazing stuff. It acts like an acrylic, but it is really fluid. The pigments in it have been milled so many times that it actually can go through an airbrush, a calligraphy pen, and basically what we're going to be using this as is kind of an opaque paint color that can be mixed in and tinted with our watercolors. So we'll be using that today. The Amsterdam Acrylic Ink does come in 56 different colors, but if you've never tried it before, I highly recommend just getting the white to start with, because you can make it almost any different color. So the next product, which is going to be one of our final layers, is the Brunseal Aquarelle pencils. So these are really amazing watercolored pencils. They're very vibrant, and they come in this really cool kind of box. It has drawers in it with felt, so it helps keep your pencils safe in shipping, but also in storage. So there's 50 different colors in total in this Aquarelle line, but this is just the 24 set. So I will be going into more detail on those as we work with them. The next thing that I wanted to go over is the Rembrandt Watercolor Paper. So this is a watercolor block. which means that it's glued on all 4 sides. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you guys how to remove the paper. So this is 100% cotton, 140-pound cold pressed paper. So let me show you guys kind of the texture that's on there, if you can see that. It has a really light kind of cold pressed texture. So I just went ahead and drew my sketch right on top of graphite. I do also want to talk briefly about the brushes that I'm going to be using because they're some of my favorites. So these are the Neptune brushes by Princeton. And as you can see, they have beautiful handle colors, but that's not all. They hold a ton of water and pigment because they are a synthetic squirrel. So they're supposed to act just like a real squirrel brush, but they're completely synthetic and they're very soft. So they hold tons of water. It's really great for making gestural strokes. So I'm going to show you guys how to use watercolors with these brushes. And then I do also want to mention the Velvet Touch brushes. It's very important when you're doing mixed media watercolor painting to have different brushes that handle different materials differently, because the brushes are working with you, not against you. So these are going to be great for the Amsterdam Acrylic Ink. The long round shape in particular is one of my favorites. These brushes do come in a lot of standard and traditional shapes, but they also make a lot of really fun specialty shapes. So,
I want to know about the watercolor paint box.
Oh, the watercolor
paint box. The watercolor paint
okay.
box.
That's the watercolor pocket box. Right here is the one by Van Gogh. So this is going to be the one that I'm using. This has a very high light fast rating. It was produced in Holland, and the colors inside are very vibrant. So I'm actually going to be starting with the watercolors directly onto my watercolor paper right here. And I'll bring my reference photo of Totoro over for you guys so that you can kind of see how I'm plugging in the colors. Okay. So when you're painting a pet portrait, you don't want to really use a color directly out of the pan. Try to use a couple different colors, especially because we're using a limited palette. So this color that we see here on the fur is kind of like a gray brown. So we're going to take both of those colors and mix them with each other on our palette. And our first layer that we have is going to be kind of loose and gestural. And the reason why I'm keeping it so loose is because we're going to be tightening it up in the later stages. So I'm adding actually a little bit of blue in there as well. So I'm going to look at my reference photo and I'm going to plug in this kind of mid-range gray that I'm seeing throughout the cat. And as you can see, I'm using a larger brush. And this is, again, the Neptune watercolor brush. And it's a size 18 round. The reason why I'm using such a large brush is because I don't really want the colors that I'm plugging in to be very detailed. I want them to be pretty loose. And again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them. It is a live stream, so I'm going to be trying my best to answer as many as I can. Okay.
How's your style changed over time?
So one of the questions that has been asked on Instagram was how my style has changed over time. Basically, I've been painting my entire life, but I've really gotten into the mixed media watercolor as of lately, just because there's so many different ways that you can really like add a new layer, even if you're unhappy with the last one. So you can work pretty loose and get pretty tight with your artwork. And I really like the freedom of that because it always allows you to go back in and kind of change what you've already done. And so I know that this painting right now looks a little bit wild, but just trust me, guys. We're gonna tighten this up quite a bit. So what I've done is I plugged in the colors, and now I've taken my brush and I've cleaned all the paint off of it. So I just have a wet brush with no pigment in it, and I'm going to take the areas that are already plugged in, and I'm going to go right over top of them. I'm going to fill in some of this other areas with the leftover pigment. And I'm going to leave the most white areas that are the most highlighted on the illustration pretty white. And the reason for that is basically for now, I just want to have really good contrast so I can see how I'm building up the layers on my cat. So the paper that I'm using is the Rembrandt watercolor paper. So this is actually a block. It's glued on all four sides except for a little kind of a slit in the side where you can take the paper off. And basically what that allows is the fact that I don't have to stretch my watercolor paper onto the table. I can just leave it attached to the block. But it's really great for mixed media watercolor because it's very resilient paper and it can take a lot of abuse. And because we're painting so many different layers on it today, we will need a paper that has a higher poundage on it.
Susan wants to know, why do you always start with medium color first and then lighter, darker hues?
So thank you for your question, Susan. The reason why I'm starting with my mid-tone colors is so that I can kind of look at my overall image and see what areas I want to plug my shadows into and which areas I really need to leave bright for my highlights. So as you can see here on the reference photo, I kind of have like a darker stripe in the fur. So I can come back over to my actual artwork and kind of plug in a little loose area. And the reason why I keep it so loose and wet is because we're painting fur. So you want it to have very organic, soft shapes. So as you can see, my paper is pretty wet. So I have a little bit of spidering of the pigment where it kind of blends out like that. That's great. That's exactly what we want. Because we want this bottom layer to be pretty soft looking, and then as we move up to the higher layers, we are going to be a lot more specific in where we place color and which edges we are going to make hard. And that's going to be how you successfully make a cat or a dog or chinchilla or ferret or whatever fun pet you have really look soft. And in my opinion, you know, when you're an artist and you're painting an animal, you can make it look exactly like the photograph. However, I'm sorry, guys. My camera moved for a second there. You can paint it realistically just as the photo shows, but it's your job as an illustrator to kind of elaborate on the areas that you want to be stylized. So, okay, so we have kind of our grays and our browns really loosely down. And now I'm going to kind of look at the nose and the ear area. I'm going to take that brown that I used earlier, and I'm going to combine it in that same pan with the red. And this is one great thing about the Van Gogh Pocketbox palette, is the fact that it's a limited palette. So if you're new to watercolors, using a limited palette is a really effective way to paint and make a cohesive illustration, because you're using the same colors all throughout. So here you can see that the nose area was a little bit wet when I put my brush on it. I'm going to go ahead and dry off my brush and show you guys a technique called lifting. So you make sure that your brush has no paint or water left in it, and you're going to use it right on that area where you're unhappy with the paint. And as you see, it soaked it right up. So this is a really great technique. If you just did an area where you're unhappy where the color bled, you can go ahead and move your brush right over that, and it will pick it up for the majority, and then you'll be able to paint over that at a later time. As I have a lot of people tell me about how they're afraid to try watercolor because so many people tell them that, you know, that they can easily make a mistake with it, but watercolor is actually a medium that is pretty forgiving. So I just took some of the ochre from the palette, and I'm going to also plug it into the browner areas with the ears. And as you guys can see in the background of this illustration of the actual photo reference, we can see some bricks and stuff. I'm not actually going to paint those in. I'm going to leave the illustration a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually paint a different background color around it. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about how to choose an effective background color and, you know, the different choices that you have from there. So let me just plug in some different colors here.
Is this wet on dry or wet on wet? Pat wants to know.
Okay. So thank you for your question, Pat. Some of the painting that we're doing right now is wet on wet. So the areas that you see that have really kind of blurred out is going to be the wet on wet. So as we go, our paper may still be wet in some areas, but we're controlling how much pigment to water ratio is on our brush. And that's going to be the main kind of technique that you're going to want to be aware of when you're using watercolor, is how much watercolor and how much water is in your brush. Because once you master that ratio, you're going to have a lot easier of a time kind of figuring out what you want the paint to do and how you want the paint to act. And that's really just something that comes with practice. So, you know, if you want an area to be really opaque, you're going to want to use a lot of paint and a little bit of water, and vice versa. If you want it to be transparent, you'll do the opposite.
Stephanie wants to know if you use masking fluid.
So, hi, Stephanie. Thanks for your question. I do use masking fluid, but not on this painting. For the people that don't know what masking fluid is it's really cool kind of medium that you can use that basically blocks out watercolor from touching the paper beneath it. So in this, for instance, we are going to be using a white acrylic ink on top of our watercolor paint. And I'm going to show you guys basically how to get that same effect without using the masking fluid. So right now I'm just mixing kind of like a darker, muddier brown gray color, and I'm plugging it into some of the darker areas in Totoro's face. So as you can see, we have a really soft looking effect in some places. That's exactly what we're going for. And so just, you know, kind of look at the different markings and the different shades on the animal that you're painting and plug them in. And especially if you're using watercolors, you know, you can use that same color and plug it in different places where you see it. Like I see the same color down here, I'm gonna plug it in over here. And, you know, as you paint the fur, like I said before, don't worry about it being a little bit more abstract. Just go in there and do fast strokes, and don't worry about being too concise.
repeat the paper? Is it hot or cold press?
So this paper is the Rembrandt cold press 140 pound block. I believe the size is roughly 5 by 7. It's glued on 4 sides, and there's 20 sheets in it. So I highly recommend investing in a good paper. If you use a cheaper watercolor paper that maybe doesn't have as high poundage, it might work just fine for you. However, if you use a lot of product on top of your paper, you might be working against it. And there's nothing worse than that. Art is hard enough as it is. The last thing you need is your supplies working against you. So I'm just going to blur out this area really quick, and then we're going to kind of go into the background. And the reason that we're going into the background next is because we really need to see how the colors are playing off of each other before we continue to build it up. Also, that way we can start kind of focusing in on our edges. So I'll switch back over to my larger brush. And as far as our reference photo goes, like I said earlier, this one has the bricks in it, but my job as an illustrator is to make the best version of this picture. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the background, and I'm going to paint a color that's closer to the cat's eyes. And what that is going to do is it's really going to push the eyes forwards, and it's going to make a really dynamic illustration. So we have 2 beautiful greens in this set. It's like a sap green and a viridian. I'm going to use a mixture of both. But to start with, I'm just going to get my brush wet, and I'm going to work it into that sap green. And I'm just going to start laying that down in the background. And this technique is called a wash.
Erin wants to know if you prefer cold or hot press.
So thank you for your question, Erin. Well, I'm an art supply nerd, so I love them both, if we're being completely honest. But for what we are doing, cold press is really effective because it's going to hold all of the different products on top of the paper in a really great, even way. The texture of the paper is going to grip the colored pencils and give us that extra pigment that we're looking for. But a lot of people do like to use hot press when using watercolored pencils because it doesn't have any texture. So it really is a preference thing. I don't personally mind the texture, but some people do. So, you know, definitely try them both and see which one suits your art style better. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of making a variegated look in the background. I'm just kind of moving that viridian green around on top. And I will probably go back in here once this has dried a little bit more with some brown, just to kind of tone it down a little bit. But as you can see, well, let me paint the green in the eyes really quick here. But you guys are going to see that it's really going to make the eyes pop. And that's exactly the look that we're going for. So I'll switch down to a smaller brush to do some smaller details. And I'm going to leave that a really light wash because the whole reason that you would want to do a mixed media watercolor is so that you have full control over all of your edges, how soft some areas of the painting are, and how crisp other areas are. So we'll keep that pretty loose for now. And as we look at our painting, we can see that it looks pretty wild right now. But we are going to add our acrylic ink in next. So as you can see, there's a lot of white in the cat, on the chest, in the nose, on the ears. So this is a really fluid product, and you can use it right out of, sometimes it comes in a little jar that looks like this. So you can use it right out of the jar if you want. I use a ton of this. So I like to squirt it in a different pan. And a little bit does go a long way. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put this over here so you guys can see it. I want you to be able to see how I'm doing this. because we're going to be doing something called toning. And we're going to be toning this ink a different color with our watercolor set.
Elena wanted to know what you do if you overwork an area.
So thank you for your question, Elena. One way to fix an area that you've overworked in watercolor is actually using this acrylic ink. So it's very high coverage, very opaque. So you can tint this watercolor to be any color you need it to be. I'm going to take some of this yellow ochre here, and I'm going to mix it in with my white. And let me show you. Because if you have an area that you've overworked in watercolor, you can go back into it with this product and essentially cover it up. So as you can see here, that yellow ochre spot that I just painted really covered that whole area. So I'll be using this exact same mixture and kind of plugging it into a couple different areas around the cat's eyes to help make them pop. And as I do this, I'm going to be a little bit more careful than my last layer that I really was just going wild with. But it's good to be loose on your bottom layers because it really gives a lot of life and character to your paintings. So I try to do that where I really keep it loose. I think there were some other questions that people asked over Instagram. What were those?
Well, how long have you been creating?
Yeah, I've been creating for a while.
Okay.
I've always done art. I went to art school, worked at an art store for a while. So I've always been an artist, and I would not trade it for anything. It's always fun.
Who's your biggest influence?
So my biggest influence is probably comics. I've always loved comics. The amount of art in them is spectacular. And I actually do have a comic book series that I've been working on. And I just am always blown away by how much effort it takes to produce one. So that really is one of my biggest influences. But there are, of course, a ton of amazing artists out there. And it's really cool that we live in the time that we do, because normally those same artists share their entire process. They show videos. So we're really lucky to live in a time where art is such a shared kind of thing, you know?
Cheryl is eager to see those pencils in use.
Okay, Cheryl, don't worry. I'm not going to let you down about seeing those pencils in use. They're fantastic pencils. They're my absolute favorite, and we are going to give those pencils. We're going to really be using those. So that's awesome. The thing about using colored pencils on top of a watercolor painting is especially if you're detail oriented, you can really focus in on specific areas and really bring a ton of attention to it, to areas that you want to. So I'm really looking forward to showing you guys those, especially because as soon as you use them, the rest of your watercolor painting looks like it needs them on top, and they're a lot of fun. So I'm also going to be using this yellow ochre plus Amsterdam Acrylic Ink color inside of the eyes. So in the photo reference, it's kind of not maybe the first thing you see, but the color around the eye is also in the eye. So as you paint your pet, make sure to really kind of take your time and pay attention to the colors. So whenever I'm painting portraits, one of my favorite things to do is kind of not look at it so much like it's a cat that I'm painting, but more so like it's different shapes and values. So as you can see, this acrylic ink layer has really helped us clarify some certain different areas that we're working on. And for the areas that are a little bit more delicate, like the nose, I'm just going in small, short little strokes. So this will be a little bit different than the watercolor because it's going to dry completely permanent, as opposed to being water soluble where you can work back into it. So now you can see that I'm kind of carving out some certain different areas on the cat's face. We're really starting to add some of those brighter highlights that we were talking about earlier. And we'll go ahead and as you paint your fur, don't be afraid to kind of do wispy strokes, you know, have fun with it. Don't worry about it being too loose, because I think that that's really going to be something that brings a lot of character into the painting, is if it is a little bit more loose. Oh, I forgot these. All right. So this cat also has some longer hair down here that I'm going to be doing. Okay.
Lori is asking if you recommend watercolor paints and pencils for a novice.
So thank you, Lori, for your question. I do. Especially this Van Gogh set in particular. One, because it's very cost effective and user friendly. The colors in it mix really easily. They're vibrant. And if you've never used watercolor before, they will do what you want them to do, which is very important when you're starting out. And that's one of the major mistakes that I see are people buy cheap supplies and then they expect for them to work really great. And it's just not the same. And this paint set is very affordable. So if you're looking to try watercolors, this is the one that I definitely recommend. And on top of that, they have a very high light fast rating. So they're going to last quite a while. As you can see, I used my set pretty heavily, and I still have the majority of my colors. So, and the other thing is, if you do run out of a color, they do sell individual pans that you can buy to replace. So it's a really great investment to make.
You had a gal say hello from Florida.
Oh.
Her name is Vicky.
All right. Hello, Vicky from Florida. I am also a Vic, short for Victoria. So.
And hello to Diane from Illinois.
All right.
Okay. How quickly does the ink dry, and what's the difference between ink and a white watercolor?
Oh, so that is a fantastic question. So the ink is going to dry pretty quickly. It has the same properties as acrylic paint. However, it is very fluid. So when it's dry, it's going to be completely waterproof. But when it's wet, like I'll show you guys right now, I'm laying down the wet acrylic in a couple different areas where I want it to be, kind of working quickly. And then I'm going to completely clean off my brush. And I'm going to take this empty brush with just water on it, and I'm going to kind of blur out some of the edges of it. So as you can see, even though we painted it down, it kind of blends out just like a watercolor. If you paint with just a white watercolor, your area is always going to be water soluble, which means that you can work back into it. It also may or may not, depending on which kind of watercolor it is, be as opaque as the ink.
Leslie would like to know, do you need to thin the ink with water?
So great question, Leslie. I'm using the ink straight out of the palette that I put it into without water on top of it. You can thin it down with water, in which case it'll be a little bit more transparent. So that's totally your choice. And that's what's so great about the ink. You can really have it stand out in a couple areas, cover areas that you need it to cover, but you can also water it down and have it give you that more subtle look if that's what you're looking for. And this brush in particular is fantastic for this type of ink. As you can see, it comes to that really fine point. So as we paint the cat's fur, we get these really awesome looking lines, and then we can still go back in there and blend. The long rounds in particular are great at holding a lot of pigment, and then we can just use extra water, dip it back in the water, and we don't have to be dipping our brush all the time into different pans because it holds so much. So I just can't say enough great things about these brushes. So as we paint the fur here, I'm just going to continue to layer it up. Let me go.
You want another question?
Sure, yes.
Kristen?
Let's do another question.
Yeah. Can you use watercolors over the ink?
So you can use watercolor over the ink. It depends on how thick the ink is. So if the ink is completely absorbed into your paper, it'll go over no problem. However, here, let me show you guys. If you have an area that's pretty built up on your ink, then the watercolor may kind of dance around it. But this area we've painted a lot of ink into, so I can go back in with my darker watercolor. And as you can see, it kind of sits right on top of the ink. It may look a little bit different when I put some more water on top of it. So let's do that. Clear off our brush, and we're going to tone down these areas that we just painted. And as you can see, that blends out really nicely. So because these inks are so fluid, they pair really, really well with the watercolors. So
Audrey wants to know how you clean your brushes. How do you clean them?
So if you're painting, oh, thank you, Audrey, for your question. Let me rewind for a second. So when you're cleaning your brushes, you want to, it depends what type of paint you're using, but if you're just using watercolor, you can lightly wash out your brushes, and you're going to want to store them horizontally as they're drying. If you're using something like acrylic ink or acrylic, you're going to want to use brush soap. Masterson's brush soap works great with both acrylic and oil. So either one of those will be great choices. Just remember, the number one thing about cleaning brushes is make sure that you store them horizontally as they dry. Because if you store them vertically like this, the water from you cleaning your brush will drip down into the ferrule. And what's going to happen is your handles are going to crack, and your brushes are not going to last as long. So definitely make sure that you're doing that, especially if you are investing in nice brushes, because you want them to last a while. All right. So as you can see, we have our kitty starting to kind of take shape here. I'm going to kind of go into the darker shadow areas a little bit more. And I'm not going to take the straight Payne's Gray dark black color from my palette. I'm just going to take some of the brown and some of the black and mix them together. And what that's going to do, it's going to soften up my black color, but also it's going to make my painting look more cohesive. So we're just going to really take a good look at my portrait and see which areas really needs those dark colors to help make the contrast pop. So I'm going to plug that in here. And this brush, again, because it's a long round, has a really nice point on it. So we can see how that really effectively makes smooth lines. So we'll also plug the darker shadows into the nose area, and that is going to be on top of the ink that we did earlier. And we'll really start defining the features on the cat's face. So the features you want to be very sharp because the rest of the cat is going to be pretty fluffy. And the same goes with dogs and other animals alike. Especially if you're painting something like a snake or a lizard, you want to really make sure to make the features on the face very distinct from the rest of the body, because the rest of their bodies will be scaly and kind of sharper. But with cats and dogs, you can get that really nice contrast effect. And we will be moving on to the colored pencils really soon here. I just want to make sure that I have all my highlights in first. So I'll go back into these areas around the eyes here, really focus on those. And my philosophy with using paint is don't ever be afraid to use too much pigment, because you can always go back in and lift it up, or you can always go back in and add more of the Amsterdam Acrylic Ink on top if you wanted to kind of dilute the paint and cover up an area. So you have always options when you're painting in mixed media. And I think that that's one of my favorite things about it. So we're really defining that area up on the forehead, and I'll be darkening up some of this area too, because it looks like a little washed out to me. What a cute cat, though. I'm partial to all cats, though, let's be honest. All right. Do we have any more questions? All right, well, while you look for those, I'm going to talk a little bit about using a dry brush versus a wet brush. So when you use a brush that has a fair amount of water and paint on it, you're going to get a very strong, bold stroke. But you don't always want that effect. Sometimes you want your brush to have something called dry brush effect.
Can you repeat the ink brand?
Oh, the ink brand?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the ink brand is the Amsterdam Acrylic Ink. So this color in particular is titanium white. It's fully opaque, but you can tint this to be any color you want it to be by mixing it with watercolors. So that's going to be the kind of effect that you see here with the softer looking colors. But like I was talking about with the dry brush, is you're going to get a fair amount of pigment on your brush, and you're going to dry it off on like a rag. I use older towels because they're very absorbent. And then as you can see, the bristles look a little bit jagged. So you can take this and you can plug in a couple different areas, and it kind of has like a more jagged look and effect to it, which is good for fur. So I'm going to go ahead and just incorporate that into a couple areas of my cat. And then I'll move on to the colored pencils. So get excited, guys, because these colored pencils are amazing. I'm really excited to tell you about them.
Terry says, what a sweet kitty.
Terry, thank you for your kind words about Totoro. This is my parents' cat. My parents have two cats, and both of them do not like me. Totoro, there's like a 50% chance that she'll let me pet her. And I absolutely love cats, so I'm a little heartbroken by it. But, you know, it's okay. They're cats. They pretty much do whatever they want. So that's how that goes. Anybody that knows a cat or has a cat knows how that is. So
Audrey said it really is amazing how quickly you created something beautiful.
Oh,
so
thank you. Thank you, Audrey. That's very kind of you. So, all right, guys. Let's move on to the long anticipated colored pencils. So Let me just briefly go over these again for people that have just joined. So this is the Brunseal Design Aquarelle pencils. So these are a professional grade pencil. The design line of the Brunseal are all professional. So as you can see, they have these 2 drawers here, and we have 24 different colors to choose from. So let me show you guys the pencils in action. They put out a great amount of pigment, and they also are really amazing at sharpening, which is my 2 must-haves for a colored pencil. The reason why they're so amazing at being sharpened is because they're glued all the way from the tip to the edge of the colored pencil around the core. So as you sharpen it, it's really going to stay in one piece. So can't complain there. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to Totoro's eyes. As we can see, there's just a little bit in there. I'm using not the same yellow, but I really want the eyes to be vibrant and I really want them to pop up off the page. So I'm just going to put those in there. And the thing about watercolor pencils is you don't always have to get them wet. If you like how the colored pencils look on the paper as is, you don't have to mess with them. They're going to be fine on top of the watercolor. And because we've used such fluid mediums that soak into the paper, we're not going to have any problems coloring over top of bumps or anything like that. Another thing that's so fantastic about these colored pencils is the fact that they have a really pearly kind of feel to them as you draw with them. It's pretty unexplainable. Like you really do have to just try it, but it almost feels like the tip of the pencil is a pearl that kind of glides across the paper. It's really nice. And one of my favorite things to do with colored pencils is to draw the most defined, darkest areas with black. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw the pupils of the cat in black. And as you can see, it really makes this one eye pop a lot more than this one. And I could make it that dark with watercolor, but it's a little risky to do that when I have such pretty colors built up in the eyes as is. So I'm going to use this same black color, and I'm really going to define that area around the eyes to make sure that that looks perfect how I want them to, since that's kind of where I've decided I want my focus to be for this drawing. So I'll go ahead and move to a kind of a burnt umber color, and I'm going to be adding the smaller details around the eyes as well.
Why use a watercolor pencil and not watercolor paint?
So a good reason to use a watercolor pencil and not watercolor paint is so that you have full control of where your color is going. And of course, you do have that with watercolor as well, but you can really get small controlled areas. And especially if you aren't very experienced with watercolor, it's a very easy way to add that extra layer of specific color into your artwork. So the reason that I like to use a layer of colored pencils instead of paint is so that you can get this really cool effect. So let me see if I can bring this up. But you can kind of see how that colored pencil sits on top of the watercolor underneath. It kind of gives it almost like a glowing look. I really enjoy that. And you also can really control the edges of how things look. So as you can see, I didn't really paint anything in this area, and the area on the mouth of the cat is actually pretty defined. So I can go in with my colored pencil, and I'm going to do small strokes in that area to kind of set it apart from the other areas. So these pencils have a 3.7 millimeter core, and they're made of, I believe it's birch wood. So they're very light. The full range is 50 colors, but they come in 3 different size sets, 12, 24, and 48. I believe the 2 extra colors are gold and silver. So if you're looking to try a new type of watercolor pencil, these are really great for that. I'm going to finish up this detailed area, and then I'm going to show you guys how these colored pencils can gradiate out with water. So let me finish this up really quick. So as you can see, you don't have to really be as direct as I was. You can also just kind of move the pencil along and blend over areas. But I want to show you the colors in action. So I'm going to color over this area down here at the bottom so that I can show you guys. As you can see, it goes on pretty evenly. The texture you do see is from the watercolor paper coming through. And you don't have to press down super hard or anything. It's just going to be like a regular colored pencil when you use it dry. So I'll just go ahead and do that on both sides here. And then you can use either of the brushes that we've talked about today, which is the Velvet Touch or the Neptune. Basically any watercolor brush is going to be just fine for this. I'm going to use the Neptune. They hold a fair amount of water, so it's going to make it really easy to blend these. But as you can see, when I put my water over top of them, they really kind of blend together. They look really smooth. And I can actually take this color and I can blend it up into the area that I've done with my traditional watercolors. And I'll do that on the other side too. And what's so cool about these is you can layer these up. You can go back in when the area is wet, use colored pencils on top of that, or you can wait for it to completely dry. And oh, I got a cat hair on my drawing. Look at that. So yeah, you can wait for them to completely dry and go back over and do another layer that way too. So I'm going to take some of that green that we've just added into the background, and I'm going to incorporate that into my cat's eyes. And that's really going to help it pop. And also, most animals have a pretty big shadow right here. You can kind of see it. It's basically at the top of the eye. It's almost like their eyelid. Humans typically have this too, depending on the lighting and angle. But we're really going to incorporate that into Totoro's look. And we'll go ahead and put a little bit of water in that area too, just to help blend everything together. Do we have any questions about the watercolor pencils or anything? Not so far? Everybody's just enjoying the magic. So I'm gonna go back in with my acrylic ink here. And I'm actually going to use a small brush that came in the colored pencil set. So the 24 set does come with a really small brush. I'm going to use that for the acrylic ink here. And I'm going to add, I'm just going to basically go back over my highlighted areas that I've done before and just reestablish those. Okay, because I really want those highlights to come out really bright and light for Totoro's eyes. We want her to look very much alive.
Why do you prefer these watercolor pencils?
I prefer these watercolor pencils over others. Mostly because of how vibrant they are, but also I've had a ton of trouble with other watercolor pencils breaking when I sharpen them. So that's the main issue. I mean, you invest a lot of money into a watercolor pencil and then you lose half of it when you're sharpening it. I've had really good luck sharpening these ones. Once I wear some of them down a little bit more, I'll show you how well they sharpen because they come to a really nice point. So I really also like these because of how they're packaged. There's a lot of care in it. And when they are sent to you, you know that they're going to be okay. I've never had any issues with receiving them.
Okay, how much working time do you have to work the acrylic ink before it dries?
So the acrylic ink dry time is going to basically be the same as an acrylic. So it kind of depends on where you are climate-wise. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, and it dries pretty quick for me. But if I put on like a thin layer of it, it'll probably take 30 seconds for it to dry. It's pretty quick. It's not going to be anything that's really going to take more than a minute. I highly doubt it would take more than a minute. So I'm just going to kind of go through with my white pencil and bring some of that whiter color back into the painting that we may have, we may have gone a little bit too far with a watercolor in some areas. We can go right over top with our colored pencils and fix those areas. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm also going to add just a couple small marks to help kind of blend the fur together. So some of these harder areas, they don't look soft. They don't look like a cat's fur. Once you start adding the little strokes to help blend between the two different patches of color, we really start to see what the fur actually feels like, which is, I think, really important when you're doing a pet portrait. So keep that in mind.
Diane would like to know, how do you store the watercolor pencils?
So thank you for your question, Diane. So the colored pencils actually come in this little drawer set, which is really cool. So these actually just close right up just like that. So you can keep these on top of your desk. So I just stack up all the different sets I have because they make pastel pencils, they make colored pencils, all sorts of different variations in the Brunseal line. So I, like the art supply nerd I am, have the a couple of the 48 sets. So they stack up really nicely, and it doesn't take up too much room because you can put things on top of the storage space as well. But I have seen some people store in jars, so that would work too.
Karen would like to know, do you need to use a fixative when it's done?
So that is a great question. So I don't normally use a fixative because we aren't really using any loose pigments. I do use a spray varnish though. I just use a spray varnish that has UVLS. And basically what that is it's going to help protect your artwork from the sun damage. So like I said, I live in Tucson, so that's a pretty big thing here. We want to make sure that the artwork lasts, but you don't have to worry about any loose pigments getting set, as the colored pencils are going to hold to the paper really nicely, and especially if you use a majority of water with them, you won't have any problems with that at all. So I'm gonna kind of redefine this area here. So basically I plugged in my lighter colors, I'm gonna plug in my darker colors, and then I'm gonna go in with a brush. And the whole reason why is I want everybody to look at the face of the cat, not so much like this lower area. And I really haven't been paying too much attention to it as I've been working. So I'm going to plug in my different colors with my colored pencils, and then I'm going to take a wet brush with no watercolor on it, and I'm really going to blend out these areas. I'm going to blend them kind of together in the direction of the fur, and what that's going to do is it's going to put it out of focus. I don't want it to be in focus. And if I'm unhappy with how the result comes out, I'll go back in with the acrylic ink, the Amsterdam Acrylic Ink that we were using earlier. And that's going to help us redefine that area.
Does it turn muddy? Patty wants to know, does it turn muddy if you add too much paint?
So that is a great question, Patty. So You can make some areas muddy by adding too much paint. We do see a little bit of that happening here. However, it's no big deal because we can go right back in with our acrylic ink, our Amsterdam acrylic ink, and we can fix that area up.
Okay, Sarah is asking what UVA protection?
I'm sorry, what?
What UVA?
UVA?
Protection. What UVA protection? Or maybe.
I'm not positive what that's referring to, but it may be referring to the UVLS that I mentioned. Yes. So the UVLS spray that I use, a couple different brands make it. I believe that there's one by Krylon, there's one by Golden. Basically, it's just going to be a spray that goes over top. They make it in a couple different finishes. They have one in satin, they have one in gloss, and one in matte. I prefer the satin because if you use a matte, then sometimes it is going to dull the paint a little bit. And that's the last thing that we want to do. We want our paint to be very vibrant. So you just go ahead and take it outside and spray it with one of those. I personally use the Golden brand. So now I'm going back in with my acrylic ink, but this time I'm taking my acrylic ink and I'm adding a little bit of water to it. And for those of you that are just joining, this is the Amsterdam acrylic ink. So what I'm doing is I'm adding my final highlights. So the reason why I'm diluting it with water a little bit is because I don't want it to be super white. I want it to be a little bit more subtle as I add it into a couple different areas. Okay, so I accidentally got too much there. Okay. But as you guys can see, we're getting there. And the thing about it is as you paint your own pet portrait at home, definitely take your time, make sure that you're really looking at your photo reference. I had my friend hold the cat outside as I took a picture of it, because outdoor lighting is really going to be the best lighting. And if you don't have good lighting on your painting, you're really just making it, on your subject of the painting, you're really just making it harder on yourself. So here we are in the final steps, really blurring out some areas. And I'm really excited to see, you know, you guys incorporate these techniques into your own pets. So if you do end up painting one, please tag me because I would absolutely love to see what you come up with.
Which colored pencils are you using now?
Okay, so these are the Brunseal colored pencils. And they are by Royal Talons. So these are going to be a watercolor pencil. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of red to my cat. So let me show you guys. So it's like a red-brown. The Aquarelle pencils are a watercolor pencil. So we can really take an area that looks rather flat, and we can add quite a bit of detail to it by adding different gradations to certain areas. So as you can see, we've added quite a bit of volume to the nose just by using very limited amounts of this colored pencil. So if we want to, we can take a wet brush and go in there and blend it together and make a really seamless blends. I don't mind having some areas look a little sketchy. Some people do, and some people will really take the time to go through after they've used a watercolor pencil. With a wet brush, they'll take that area and they're going to blend it out. And as you can see, it's going to add a lot of softness, but also that extra layer of color, which is really what we're doing here with the mixed media techniques, is we're building up certain areas to look how we want them to. And we're just going back in and making sure that all of our values are right and everything is looking good. So One more thing that I do want to show you guys. I know we're getting close to the end of our demo here. Is I wanted to show you how you can go back in with that white ink one more time. So I just took the white ink on the brush, and I'm not super happy about this whisker area because I feel like it needs to be whiter. So I'm going to go back in with that color, and you can see the coverage of this ink. So as I put it down, I'm plugging it into the areas that I really want it to go. And then I'm getting the rest of the ink off of my brush, and I'm going to blend the edges of that ink into the edges of the watercolor. So we even have some watercolor pencil in here that it's picking up on, and that's okay. It's okay if everything all blends together. You kind of get that trifecta of using all three supplies. So, yeah, I'm going to add a little bit more dark down here, and then we're going to wrap it up. So if you guys have any other questions that you want to ask, now is the time. I'm happy to answer anything about the supplies or about Totoro, anything you guys need to know. But you can see how you can really just take your time, build up your layers, and keep carving back into the areas that you've already done. Oh, I almost forgot the whiskers. That would have been criminal. So I'm going to take my long round, and I'm going to take my pure white, and I'm going to add some whiskers while we're waiting to see if there are any final questions. So all these final hairs.
Lots of comments.
Lots of comments?
Yes, nice comments.
All right, I love nice comments. Keep those nice comments coming, guys. Thank you for your kind words and for watching today. I'm really excited about the pet portrait contest and sharing these awesome supplies with you. Really hope you give them a try. With our long round brush, we're just getting some final details in here. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a really fantastic time being here and painting Totoro with you today. So thank you so much. And until next time.